What are some bitter truths about human nature? Story 1. I was taught in my youth that giving to the point of self-neglect was proper if people needed it more than you. Then I would be upset when my expectations of others to do the same fell short in regards to me and things I needed help with. It wasn't until years later I realized that due to the laws of attraction, people who are generous givers mostly attract people who are selfish takers. After some time, I realized I must be diligent about identifying and setting boundaries to those people before they bleed me dry. With the same analysis, I've tried to align myself with like-minded people and found a nice slice of happiness with a good group of people. Story 2. There will always be crazy people, no matter what race, religion, or opinion you have, and there will always be people who will associate those crazy people with the entirety of whatever race, religion, or opinion they have, no matter the evidence otherwise, which will end up furthering the madness and making things worse. 2. There will always be people who assume they know the entire situation and put it in simple ideas. No matter how broad and complicated the situation is, they think they've seen enough of the picture to know what's up, rather than the full picture. And there will always be people who put them down without explaining to them what's going on, and assume they're all idiots. Some either legitimately don't know, or are making an honest mistake, making them more likely to believe their own falsehoods out of spite, making things worse. 3. For some, common sense is a rare thing, and there will be people who will think lowly of them without explaining why what they're doing defies common sense, causing those who lack the common sense to feel justified. 4. There will always be pessimists who think they are realists or think they are mature since they see the world as a crappy place. There is both good and bad in the world. It isn't getting better, but it isn't getting worse. And there will always be optimists thinking they're improving the world when they're actually making things worse, making more pessimists. And to end in a bittersweet note, there will always be people who try to ruin the world, but there will always be people who try to make it a better place. There's plenty of evidence for both. Story 3. Moral code is subjective and the reality of human nature is cruel. What you see as moral, not everyone is going to, even if we go to extremes. You think what Hitler did was not moral? Probably. I hope so. Well, in his head it was probably moral. In the end, who gets to decide what's moral or not? Say you have an inescapable choice of having to decide between saving one loved one and 100 random people. Some people would decide to kill their loved one and save the other 100, and some would let the 100 die and save the loved one. So which one is moral exactly? If you let the 100 die, their families will be sad and they will scold you. Hell, the whole world might. On the other hand, if you kill the loved one, others close to you, important to you will scold you, and that will also hurt you a lot, because it's the people that you really care about. Are you selfish if you let them die instead of your loved one? They have families too, but then again, that one person is your own family. Either way, you will feel like crap, and that's reality. My analogy here was a bit extreme, but it can be applied in other aspects of life. Story 4. We all like to think that we'd be the hero of our own story. That is a lie. Most of us wouldn't rescue Anne Frank, for example. Oh no. Some of us would be doomed along with her. Some would be the guards at Auschwitz. Others would be the ones who reported Anne Frank and her group to the authorities. But the worst kind of people, the kind of people most of us are, deep down, we would be the ones who stand by and do nothing. If you think you would never be that kind of person, you're lying to yourself. Peter never thought he'd deny following a man named Jesus around the country for 3 years, and yet he did just that, most likely to save his own skin. Story 5. That we will put ourselves and wants first all the time, every time, and anytime. Anytime a panic, disaster, etc. happens, they are people who will overly hoard everything for themselves and not look out for others. Cruelly destroy other people and their property if it means we get what we want. Like kicking people out of their homes and lands to build fancy stores, condos, etc., not even caring that those people are or will be homeless. 2. That we like to feel superior to others even if everyone is the same. People will still find a way to be superior. Story 6. Humans are part of the animal kingdom, but we are able to think things through, but our primary instincts are still there. Stealing, fighting, killing, liking, and disliking. We pretend that we are so advanced that we aren't part of that primal world, but we are. Just watch an episode of Snapped or Cold Case Files. I think about this a lot. People will turn on you and go crazy for no good reason other than I didn't like you. So breaking that down to the animal world, if you have the scent of an outsider, you could be killed. If a pack of animals has an alpha, there is usually one that wants that spot and will kill to earn it. We aren't different at all. Story 7. We often create our personal narratives, assigning reasons to our actions after the fact. Many of the reasons you think you have for doing what you did were actually invented retroactively to maintain a coherent sense of self. This has many consequences. Here are 2 of them. If you do something bad to someone else, you will like them less. You will like them less because when constructing your narrative, you need to justify your behavior, but you won't realize that this is what you are doing. You will find reasons to dislike the people you hurt. If you do something nice for someone else, you will like them more, for the same reason, regardless of whether or not they are worthy of your admiration. Story 8. Man is selfish. We are all selfish in different ways. Even the person with a good heart you knew is selfish. It's just that being good tends to fool anyone that man ain't selfish when it actually is. There is always a hidden agenda behind good acts that the doer may not be even well aware of. As a child growing up in an environment where I see people helping others, I thought of those people as not being selfish for sharing what they have with others. But as I grew up, I realized that it is not the case. I noticed some details that my young eyes have never seen: deceptions, lies, sugarcoating, and anything a man can think of to serve himself. Others are selfish because they publicly serve themselves among others, but don't you think that people helping others for the sake of self-satisfaction from receiving thank you ain't being selfish? Story 9. You'd think Europe is pretty homogeneous in terms of ideals, and we are. But in a staggeringly short time frame, one nation began purifying their culture and genetics at horrific expense to others. And you see this throughout history. There's a staggering ability of all people to disregard another's humanity and believe them lower than livestock. Kinda along the same vein, I think here in the West we assume we're good people. But really, all you have to do to be a good person in the West is not actively be a prick. The risk of starvation is low. Risk of dying from disease or infection is low even now. We have water, warm houses, and even despite the terrorist attacks, a low risk of coming under attack from invaders or even just regular assault. There's no real motivation to screw over another human. In fact, we have more reasons not to: imprisonment, financial penalty, public opinion. Most of us probably aren't good. We just have no real reason to be bad. But then you head into a competitive work environment, and nobody trusts anyone. People with a hypothalamus issue will knowingly drink themselves to death because their need for water is firing off as life or death. If we actually were in a life or death situation, I'd have to say we probably would slaughter another family to protect our own. I don't know. Never been there. But looking at what has happened with people in the past, I'd assume most people would slaughter another to steal their resources if they felt their need was great enough. Probably why the overarching hero of the West story is about self-sacrifice. Story 10. Racism will never go away. When I was a kid growing up learning about racism, I thought racists are all old generation thinking. Once the old people die, the world will be a better place. And sure, maybe they ensured systemic racism, but it's disheartening to see young adults being racist scum. I think we have an inherent us versus them ingrained into us back from survival days. Tribes had wars and raids and all that. Same way there's a theory that yawning is contagious because someone in the group is signaling it's safe to sleep. This is all speculation, of course. I have no hard data. Story 11. There is nothing more grim than this study here. It predicts the evolution of human social structure and is highly supported by history. Only read this if you're ready to be depressed for the next few days. Look up John Calhoun's study on rat utopia. It's a famous study, so you'll find it. To paraphrase it, humans are unique in our ability to independently control to some extent the supply of our demands. While other species rely on their habitat providing their needs, we can produce more supplies than we need to survive, carrying the human species into a state of overpopulation. We start developing traits that work to lower the population to balance the supply and demand. This means homosexuality, atheism, or the overall belief of no higher power. The ease of humans killing their own through abortion, cannibalism, selfishness, and laziness tend to overwhelm the population until the supply is much less than the demand. History has shown us proof of this, and this rat experiment shows us it's a fundamental trait of evolution. It's degrading towards humans, embarrassing, and makes those who studied this question common beliefs such as, we are children of a supreme being, and we are good and destined for greatness. This makes people feel we are indeed enslaved to nature, and we are nothing but predictable, insignificant diseases populating an infested Earth. Story 12. Most of society is about keeping human instincts in line, now that so many of them are out of step with practical reality. They made sense in the wild. They don't anymore, but that doesn't mean they go anywhere. Perhaps in time they'll be smoothed out by other evolutionary adaptations. But in a world with a population size, these large, most beneficial mutations just end up bred out. We're probably evolutionarily stagnant in many ways. So much the worse. Not every way society tries to wrangle human instinct is honest, just, or even has your best interests in mind. Many facets of our economy are specifically geared to game your brain, and they're shockingly effective when measured population-wide. We're better than slugs and monkeys and lizards and things, but we're still pretty much dumb animals. All of those higher functions of our brain amount to little more than a thin silken veil of reason atop a Mount Everest of archaic, involuntary programming. And because of that, most of our dreams going forward are probably doomed to be just that, mere dreams. This is likely the pinnacle of our capability, or we're very close to it. The best we can realistically hope for is that, of what remains of our potential, we will find in it the intellectual and industrial capability to design successors, robotic or organic, who can live out those dreams nature did not equip us to pursue for ourselves. Sweet dreams. Story 13. Some people genuinely don't love their children, and not all of those people go on to horribly exploit their children, but plenty of them just never get involved in their kids' lives in any meaningful way. There is no doubt that this is true. I certainly suspected it my whole life. At age 40, my mother confirmed this for me. The greatest mistake of my life was adopting you, she told me. Also, there hasn't been a day in the past 35 years I haven't regretted having you for a son. Surprisingly, I've come to be okay with this. 18 years on. I realized she just didn't have that spring in her watch. But in the 1950s-60s, women of her social group had children, period. If they couldn't make them, they adopted them. She just did what she thought was normal and required. Hearing her finally say it was actually a kind of a relief, I realized that I wasn't imagining her scorn and distance all those years as a kid. I left home at 18 and had little contact with her over the years, and was always blamed by family, and sometimes blamed myself, for not being a better son in those 20 years. I'm happy to report that I'm a deeply loving dad to my two sons, and blessed to be married to a woman who loves her children like mad. So no cycle of exploitation here. Praise God. Story 14. Violence not a solution to problems. I am not a violent guy, not at all. But I came to situations where a threatening approach quite saved my butt. Not saying we all should be violent, just saying that for some people, this is the only language they understand. You can't talk yourself out of every situation, especially when you're in one of the more difficult parts of this planet. Violence is the ultimate solution to unfixable problems. I'm not saying that to glorify violence, that's just a fact of life, a part of nature. Usually our biggest problems are other people, even if those people are just in the way blocking us from the problems we really want to solve. The most complete and final way to fix a person problem? Get rid of them. Got a person that society just can't save? Serial killer? Police control in prison is a form of protracted violence. Death sentences are obvious violence. What about a tyrant or dictator? Sic semper tyrannis. Government exists to control the use and application of violence. That is their main cartel. This is why terrorists pose such a direct threat to the government, because that set of behavior is a direct threat to the cartel. They can never defeat the government militarily, but just by existing, by creating an outlet for violence that is not under exclusive government control, they have circumvented the government's main source of power, and therefore undermine it. Story 15. Let's start at the top. People are essentially broken. You find me a stable, well-adjusted, normal person, and I will show you how they are almost, if not exactly, as broken as you. This is fine. As above, a lot of people want to be unique and special, but end up doing the same things as everyone else. This is also fine. Most people are scared of the same things: loneliness, speaking out, being forgotten, being discarded, etc. It's universal. Fear is what drives us to do the things we do, as it has always been. Morality is subjective, but people do not understand this or refuse to see it. A staggering amount of us just do not want to think critically. The ones that remain often misunderstand critical thinking for being opinionated. People are the same the world over. The culture or region-specific thing that you are so proud of doesn't mean nothing. It's fine to be proud of your heritage. It is not fine to pound that into every facet of your being. People make mistakes, all the time. 90% of all people making mistakes have justifications for those mistakes. Rarely do we own up to them. This is not fine. All the anger in the world is caused by unresolved pain. People are not smart enough to recognize that. As above, people are dumb. We may have evolved into making tools and art, but we are essentially without awareness. Once awareness is achieved, it is replaced by either apathy or misery. All in all, there is no fixing this. It's rarely spoken about since people just either ignore it or accept it as the truth of the world. Be happy with whoever you are, whatever you do. Try not to hurt people. If you do, own up to it and do the time. Be excellent to each other. Story 16. People will continue to hurt those with disabilities. There is no denying it, and it will not go noticed. Even the media has given up on the disabled. You rarely see news stories about those with disabilities nowadays, but mention something about race, good or bad, and the media is all over it. And for good reason. Black people have been around long before many disabilities became a thing. So in a way it makes sense, even though it isn't fair. In addition, society has taken an ignore the problem and it'll go away approach to disabilities. What do we think the disabled are? Husks. That eats up money that should go to more deserving people, like veterans or the elderly. Aren't those who fought for our country and our senior citizens more important than some disabled humans in wheelchairs? Society thinks, but only to itself. This is the way it's been for years, and in 2018, this is the way it's staying, and no one will do a thing about it. Story 17. Humans are amazing creatures capable of doing wonderful and kind things for ourselves, each other, and the world around us, along with the creatures within it. Humans are also capable of atrocities and horrors that are almost unspeakable at times. The best part, in my opinion at least, is that we are never limited to one extreme or another. Humanity is full of gray, where actions and motivations can be justified from one angle and completely baseless from another angle. There are few hard truths about humanity because of this. As for every person you meet, that one truth applies to, there's just the same chance that a different truth won't apply to them, making it invalid. It's near impossible to generalize a group so dynamic and changing such as humanity, and I think that's a great thing. Story 18. We accept that humans physically evolve. We accept that humans mentally evolve. If we see people from different countries evolve differently physically, Swedish people have blonde hair, Chinese people are on the shorter side, etc., there's no reason not to assume that humans won't evolve differently mentally, and in fact, that's what the results have shown. This is shot down, saying that the results don't count because the fact that there are different contexts wasn't accounted for. Basically, the base results, along with common sense, aren't supposed to count all due to wishful conjecture about what might happen if the context is accounted for. If some simple gene mutation gave a noticeable overall increase in intelligence, that trait would likely be selected for and already have dominated human evolution even before we left Africa. The only exception is if it came with a significant drawback. Note that humans have already evolved with significant drawbacks just to achieve the brain power they currently have, thus premature births, along with extended child-rearing. Basically, our brains are already highly optimized organs that have effectively made us masters of our environment. IQ differences do exist between different populations, but can be completely accounted for by differences in nutrition and education, thus why IQ has gone up for nearly a century. The minor physical racial differences you point out are almost all adaptations to specific environments, but it would be hard to come up with any similar mental adaptations that wouldn't just be better served by children learning about their environment. Story 19. People who care about you will still allow you to suffer if they benefit somehow, and if you've got no boundaries to stop them from taking your time, money, emotions, etc. For example, a parent might know they are clinging on to you emotionally and not letting you be independent or stunting your adult life. Yet they get that parental high or other benefits, so they keep doing it because you're not exactly stopping them from controlling your life. They might complain you need to move out, but will up the control as soon as you try. Another example, you might lend that one friend a free ride in your car everywhere. They know these actions might be dividing the friendship, or tiring you out or costing you money, but because you keep agreeing to help, they won't stop doing it. They know even with your passive complaints, in the end, you always cave. Same with that former date that just wants to be friends, but still treats you like a love interest. They will still call you up for that ego boost, even if it breaks your heart not to be closer to them. Know a few people who have gone through this one and argue this person is a great friend, possible future partner, etc. Worst part in all of these is once you start to say no, they will get mad because by that point they've been so used to you having no boundaries. It's more your responsibility to put up these boundaries and to stick to them, because people who should care for you will walk all over you, given the opportunity and benefits you let them take. Story 20. People like to believe that most people are good, while there are the few that are genuinely bad. I think it is largely the opposite. I personally think that most people are crap, and there are a few diamonds in the pile of garbage. It's pretty taboo to think, I've found. But I've seen some good people do some messed up stuff. My pastor at my former church ran off with some girl, leaving his wife and kids. I've seen a father leave his wife and 3 crying kids. I've seen a girl lead a guy on, feigning interest, only to steal hundreds of dollars from him saying, "I'll pay you back in a week," and then ditch. All of these people perceived as good, but deep down they're scum. And I believe that's just how most people are. It's just depressing to admit. Story 21, we are all basically the same. Everyone likes to point out and highlight how their demographic is better in some way, or how some other demographic is somehow worse or more evil. I have lived and traveled to worked in over 20 different countries, and everyone everywhere is capable of good and capable of evil. There are cultural differences, of course, but those really are just academic. Food is not necessarily better in Florence. Art is not necessarily better in Paris. Muslims are not necessarily evil, nor are Jews or Christians. Whether you're a Republican redneck or a leftist hipster, we are all just trying to do the best we can with what we've got.